listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plimer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 93 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plimer, and joining me today is Lesley McKenzie. Lesley hails from Fort Nelson, British Columbia in Canada, and is the women's head coach for the Japan Rugby Football Union. She represented Canada at 2 Rugby World Cups and earned 25 caps. Lesley had coaching roles with UBC before moving to New Zealand as a Rugby Development Officer. She has been based in Japan for 3 years now, and it's a pleasure to have her on the show. So welcome, Lesley.
Konnichiwa, and thank you for having me.
Oh, nice. I like that. How's the Japanese going?
It's a little bit better. I'd say better after camps, and then it takes a real dip. So I've taken no formal lessons, so it's impressive enough.
Cool.
Don't speak the language.
Nice. All right. Well, it's great to have you on the show, and it's an exciting role that you're in Japan, and we'll touch on that in a little while. What about your backstory from growing up in Fort Nelson, Canada, which for people who aren't on top of their Canadian
geography, have to look that up.
That's about 1,600 k's north of Vancouver. So, what do you do up there?
We were free range kids. So my brother
Awesome.
and I, basically, and it was the 80s. So like, get out the house.
Yep. See ya.
Don't come back. We'll see you at 6 p.m. Not before that. Otherwise, you'd be mooching around the kitchen asking for what's for dinner. So it was like not real organized sport territory. Pretty few opportunities, indoor soccer and stuff in the winter, but if you weren't in organized hockey, which was expensive and for boys, and you might drive down and bill it in Fort St. John or Dawson Creek or something, you're not doing much. So yeah, just sort of like camping, fishing, forts, snow shoveling, massive amounts of that. Yeah. So when we moved south, I took pretty much every opportunity for the sports that you didn't have to be a real killer at yet. So couldn't dribble. Didn't bother with basketball. Tried netball. Didn't have to dribble. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
So literally like anything that you didn't already have to have like an acquired skill set, I was like, yeah, I'll have a bit of that. So just rowing, netball, field hockey. Yeah.
Cool. Born for running straight and smashing into things by the sounds of it.
Yes. Yeah. All of those other things fell by the wayside and when I found rugby, because that was what it was about. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And what were those first playing experiences like? How'd you get into the game?
Genuinely wanted to play field hockey when I got to UBC. So knew that I wanted to play sport, really liked actual organized sport. It suited my nature. But I actually literally got mononucleosis first day of school. So felt really sick. All of a sudden couldn't do anything. I was such a stress case. It was no small surprises happened to me. But then obviously you can't play any sport. You can't do anything. So I went from doing 4 to 5 different sports at high school and gym and stuff like that to nothing. And then continue to eat because I thought like those didn't have a correlation. So sort of waddled out to rugby when I saw the poster on the bathroom door in the gym in January. I thought like, yeah, they'll have me until I'm fit enough to play field hockey. And seriously, never went back.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah.
And you played with UBC. Did you go on with club as well, or was your club?
I played, UBC was my club. So we had the varsity team played which I made after 2 years of going hard.
Awesome.
I played 4 years or my 5 years at varsity, and they also played in the BC Women's Premier League as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I squeezed every last season I could out of that. And then we actually started up a UBC Old Boys women's team, the Ravens, down at Jericho. Which fell over after a couple of seasons, but then sort of limped up to the Marilomas for the last season of club before 2010 World Cup.
Nice.
And that was it for me. Played a couple of club seasons in Wellington during that time, and then also went when I moved down there, I played a couple of club seasons for Wainui Yamada, and then hung it up Now I play boys.
As it happens with all of us. And how'd the Canada selection come about? That's an interesting pathway.
I've always been really hung up on what can I achieve with this? What can I do? What level can I get to? And it's sort of it's not a disingenuous way of putting why I'm motivated to do certain things, because I do like trying to climb to the top of something and have a look at what the landscape is from there. So once I sort of decided rugby is going to be what I'm going to do, and sort of found that there were some hooks in the sport that worked well with my attributes and what I like doing, it was just sort of natural progression. Like, I'm not going to stop until I get to the highest possible standard that I can reach. So I spent 1 year, like you and I talked earlier about rugby being a late entry sport. I spent 2 seasons with Canada under 23 program with Sluggo, Rick Suggett, and Spencer Robinson, which was nice. It was awesome. Really foundational in terms of what I wanted my Canada experience to look like. But there were heaps of girls around me at UBC and onwards that had played, under 17 Canada, under 19 Canada. And I felt really sort of behind the starting line on that. Realized, later with some perspective, that wasn't necessarily the case, because you are a product of everything that you've done prior to. And there's some really great cases for range rather than sort of a Tiger Woods style entry to the sport. So don't regret any of that. Certainly appreciate everything that I took into that in terms of what made me the type of player that I became. And then, 7 years with the National 15s program was great in terms of things that it teaches you about yourself, not necessarily in the moment, but upon some reflection later.
Of course. Yeah, and I think that's a good one for player identification too. It's, you don't have to have gone to this school or have played this many years in a sport like rugby. There's so much, general physical attributes that you can bring to the game, and with time and effort, players are going to potentially produce for you.
100%. Like, I think, and that's something that I've really noticed looking at some of the different player programs, development programs I've been involved in since then, and since moving from playing into coaching and working in development, is it's really not where did the kid go to school. It's what else about the kid is going to make him or her a good rugby player. And often, for example, real strong example is working in Wanganui as a development officer, having a bit to do, and that's a heartland union, so that's a small rural province where sort of farming and agriculture and forestry is the sort of key industries. What does a kid do before he comes to school? It's going to make him special on the rugby field. And in a lot of those rural provinces, there's a lot there, and you can see, I guess, all the intersections of someone's life, the way they've been brought up, the people they've been brought up around, and what's important to them. So, like, I laugh about snow shoveling, but we had a hella long driveway, and we had a lot of stuff growing up in Cornell. Yeah, it is tough work. So it's real, you just get stuck into some work, and same thing working on a ranch in the summers in Cornell in the Caribou. You just get stuck into work that lasts a long time. It's physical, uncomfortable. And it doesn't stop till you've done the job. So I think those things go into a rugby player as much as anything else. Yeah. And those are, like, if people think that you've got to go to a certain school and that school's in the middle of this city, that's not a great recipe all the time.
No, I agree. Awesome. And what about those, you mentioned, you spent some time in New Zealand, but you also were coaching a little bit at UBC during your time there. What were those early coaching experiences like? What was some of your highlights? If you could put a highlight reel together.
I don't know if it's a highlight reel, it might be more bloopers, but like, just as a new coach, so I began working with the second division team there. We had two teams, a varsity team, and then there was a development team that played in BCRU second div. And I was told while I was still a player, like, you're injured, but we'll still give you the free gym pass if you coach the seconds. So, yeah, like, I really enjoyed doing that, because just finding out what's the key to a big step forward. And okay, so it's tackle tech. Let's work on that, and then give you some shortcuts. And then, like, just got hooked on the joy in the faces when they've done something well, and they're like, oh shit, like, that's actually not as hard as I thought it was. Great. So that's a real pat on the back for you if you want to give yourself the credit for that. But just like finding the key to that door was so rewarding and so entertaining, so enjoyable, that when UBC asked me to take over the head coaching role for the varsity team when I'd finished my eligibility, I think I was still finishing up my master's at the time. Honestly, it feels that long ago. I spent so many years there. But I thought, like, nah, I'm not really, that's a really big job. I'm not ready for that. But Spencer Robinson actually had a talk to me, and he said, like, nah, you got to stress yourself and strain, same as getting big in the gym. You got to stress the muscles to get stronger. So I said yes to that. Yeah, really good advice, because I've just applied that same principle to everything after that. But with the UBC gig, I'm really so grateful that I had the opportunity. I think I coached 3 full seasons there. And starting out, I made so many mistakes. Like, and like, in terms of highlight reels, genuinely, it would have been so many more mistakes than highlights in terms of what I did. But the whole thing was a highlight in that, like, learned so much about how to interact with people and what some of my weaknesses were. Like, it was a running joke by the time I left, but I felt like I had to put distance between myself and the current players because I was so young and I was only recently removed. And, like, I think I still had a bit of chip on my shoulder as an old vet, like, oh, these kids these days.
Kids
like,
today.
Yeah, kids these days, 4 years younger than me. So it became a joke because, like, I was quite prickly and like, oh, I don't hug people. And then I was like, oh, maybe I do hug people. And just, I couldn't be genuine to myself. It was so weird, but it was funny. And by the end of the time I was there, like, most people just laughed at it, which was funny, myself included. But, like, those opportunities to try things and then to see how they worked, and, oh yeah, a bit heavy handed with that. Or, this was really helpful in terms of how do I see her as a person first? Like, loved that stuff. And then had some good support from some people back in New Zealand around just what's real key. So you're starting basically from scratch. Where do you need to go with that? Women's team, injury prevention's got to be your major one, and then go from there. So, like, had some great guidance. It was the opportunity to ask some really good questions and then take the answers and then work out where to go from there. So I think that was the great opportunity. And now that I think about it, the great opportunity has always been, what questions am I now going to be empowered to ask or forced to ask about the next task? It's cool in terms of finding out and developing.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's important, and it's a good philosophy to have. And, obviously New Zealand shaped your coaching philosophy quite a bit while you were there. Can you briefly explain your time there and what that actually did in terms of impacting the way you coach now?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, again, Andy, like, when I say the time as an athlete gives you an opportunity to reflect, but maybe not till later. And my time at UBC gives me the opportunity to reflect, maybe not till later. Same with New Zealand. Like, I was thinking about that question and what's going to be my answer to that. And I think just overall, I ended up dealing with a lot of different kinds of teams, different ages, men, women, boys, girls, mixed at schools, like different kinds of schools. And so at the front end of things, I think the tendency is to try and fit the same shoe on every foot and be like, right, this is what I think, this is what needs to be done, this is how it needs to look. And then you go around and you try and force that onto every situation. I think that's the early tendency to say, like, this is what I really believe in. I'll hang my hat on these couple of keys. And then later on, thinking about the efficacy of that and what was the response like? Was it really good? What was actually the good response in response to? It sounds stupid, but the key threads there, I think, are everybody likes to learn something. So if you can introduce the kind of environment where everyone gets an opportunity to learn, to be engaged, and to be like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like, I feel like I can do that now, or I've got more power to do that. Everyone likes to learn stuff. Everyone likes that challenge and that application. I think everyone needs to feel some joy in whatever they're doing in sport. I think enjoyment is really important, but it's not, for me, joy isn't about like, oh, I'm really happy every day. It's like, have you been able to challenge yourself to overcome something and to find some joy alongside your teammates in a cause and a purpose? That's where I think rugby really serves us and serves that idea. And then you need honesty to bring all of that about. So that's sort of my coaching philosophy, is opportunities for bravery and challenge, opportunities to find joy, and then honesty is what's going to underpin that. So if you haven't got that sort of feeding into the challenges, how do you challenge people? How do you question them? How do you provide the platform to create those emotions? Then you're not going to get very far. So I think long story long, dealing with heaps of different groups and different needs, and sometimes you're with them for a couple of weeks, sometimes a whole season, whatever it is, like, what do they need? And then be responsive to that. And I think it was a really good learning curve for me, from going from Wellington in a girls and women's development officer role and dealing with a heap of different issues and people who wanted different things, and being on the sort of front foot of the women's rugby resurgence down there was cool. It was exhausting, but cool. And moving into the heartland, a totally different group of people invested in the game, needing different things, but like great in terms of coach development for myself, because it keeps you agile and keeps you responsive to who needs what do they need. Shit, that's just changed because, that kid's had to go inside because he's got a bloody nose. Now we're down to 5 kids. Or this premier group needs work on scrum. How are we going to deal with that? What do they come from today? What's in the background from work, sort of thing. So being responsive and being adept at changing to fit their needs is great practice. Like I would recommend that to anybody. Not specifically go to New Zealand, be a rugby development officer, but I think it's underrated in terms of coach development, is getting across a number of different environments and different populations.
Yeah. No, I know from my own coaching that's been crucial. I also know like that switch that you're talking about there, where it's like, instead of what do I need as a coach, what do they need as a player? That's key. I think that's a big step that coaches need to make to develop and to get better.
Big time. I think and it's easy to not make that differentiation when you are really invested in it, when it becomes about your ego and how are you going to look when you pull this off, what's it going to do for you, and where do you want to take it? Like that's when it's really easy to go down the path of how you want to impose things rather than respond to things. Yeah.
Cool. All right. And now after New Zealand, you're into Japan. How'd that Japanese role come about? What was the pathway there for you?
So Japan, I was working in Wanganui at the time, and Japan Rugby had been doing some looking around. They specifically wanted a female coach. This was to work with the sevens girls at the time, and they said, we're looking for a woman because we want to encourage that and sort of role modeling in that visible pathway for our players. And the question they sort of asked was like, who's in New Zealand and who's who? And I was certainly not who's who at the moment, but it is a little bit who you know, because Kelly McCallum had done some coaching. She's a former Canadian international in Cabden and coached in Japan and coached in Queensland and whatnot. So she said, oh, you need to call Les. She's doing all kinds of things. She always pumps my tires like way further than they ought to be. But the result was, and relationships in Japan are really strong. So it's really very much about who you know here, because there's a implied level of trust. Trust is built on relationships here rather than, we'll have a look at your CV first. So it is very much who you know. And they emailed me and I thought, oh, I don't see this being a viable option. Like, I don't really think they know who they're contacting. But I ended up coming over for a couple of different, like say a week here, a week there, just to do some work with the sevens program. And they invited me full-time after I joined them for the Sydney leg. And then I moved over here. What was it? Would have been 2 months after that in 2018, sorry. Yeah. I've been here ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's that culture shock like? Are you in Tokyo or?
No, I'm not. I'm in the country actually. I'm in Saitama is the province. It's an hour bit up and to the left of Tokyo, half an hour on the Shinkansen, hour and a quarter by pleb train, and it's right in the middle of a bunch of fields. So like this is farming country,
right?
Which is great for the dog. So there's open space, and that was part of the deal for me is like I need to be able to bring the dog because I got him in Wanganui and I can't get rid of him. So
yeah,
I've got a house with a little bit of a yard, and I've like told you picked up another dog for my twins. So but it's bloody hot in the summer, like not too in Aussie, but it's insanely hot in the summer. So it is a bit of character building. It's been 3+ years of character building through the summer months, but yeah.
So what's the state of the women's and girls game in Japan? How are things progressing there? Where are the hot spots for playing and those kind of things?
So one of the reasons I'm here in Kumagaya is they based the women's sevens here. So the women's sevens have it's sort of residential, but they're almost never home. So they're always sort of going into camp somewhere else, or at least prior to COVID. But they've got a really strong club program here. And sevens has been the women's game in Japan for the past several years, probably since the Olympic status was formally announced. That's where all the money went into. And there's been a 15s program, but it's the kind that, countries dust off a year or so prior to the World Cup qualifying or the year of. So that was what I inherited in 2019 was a long dormant 15s program. And some girls that were not disillusioned, but just sort of, there's that sense of, well, what about us when you see heaps of money going into a really well-resourced, well-funded sevens series. It's got a mega sponsor. Like I'm going to a sevens tournament this weekend. It kicks off the Taiyo Seme series in Tokyo. It's at Chichibunomiya Stadium. They play in huge stadiums. This is a huge cost, the sevens comp. And then 15s is very much the poor cousin at the moment. But that's part of the challenge is I want to change that. So we want to change that stature because there's some really, really good girls coming through the high schools in terms of 15s. We've got a brilliant under-19 tournament, Kobelco under-19 tournament, end of August, unless it's a COVID year. So last year's was cancelled, but there's some great talent, some great capabilities, but we just need to keep those bigger girls in the game and invested in. Clubs need to see that 15s has got something to offer them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that probably leads me to my next question. How are you approaching the role in terms of profiling your team style of play? You mentioned genetics is probably on play there in terms of physical attributes, but also the size of the player pool. How are you going about that?
Yeah, the size of the player pool is it's going to be the ultimate sort of parameters for any kind of decisions you think as a coach you want to make. So going to be limited by that. But anyone who watched Japan in the 2019 World Cup, and everyone should have because they were outstanding, they know how we're going to play. So they know how that's the blueprint for success at the moment for Japanese athletes. Although we haven't got sort of your handful of Kiwis and South Africans and whatnot, squad, we don't have any of that. But very much about work ethic, as it, no one's going to be surprised to hear that, but just high sort of power to body weight ratio and repeatability and skill accuracy. So the things that make Japan good on an international level are going to be things in their culture that's long been stressed in terms of mastery and accuracy and diligence towards improvement. And that makes them an absolute joy to coach, to be honest. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. And you got to, I think, coming in as a coach, you've got to mold your culture that you want of the team around what the culture is of the country. You can't implant a culture that you think is going to work with that team.
No, I remember the press conference when I was announced as a head coach, and somebody said, "Oh, you've been in New Zealand for the last whatever years. Like, are they going to play like the Black Ferns?" Like, no. Oh no, I'd be gone pretty quick if that was the case. But yeah, I mean, it is like you said, you've got to be able to put aside what you are and what you think is probably key, and then. To be honest, I think probably the moment I'm a good fit for them because the things that I think are important, and at the moment it won't shock anyone if I say that our entry ticket to the international game is improving our ability in contact. No one's falling off their chair hearing that. So it happens to be an area where I enjoy coaching, and I think there's a lot of gain to be made in the women's game on that ticket. So I think at the moment I'm a good fit for them, and then we'll see how they evolve past me in the next couple of years.
Nice one. Well, you're just out of a camp with the women's team. What did that look like? How long were you with the players? What kind of structure was it, and what kind of cool things did you get up to in that time?
Kind of cool things. So we we had them for 5 days, and they're actually, like I said, they're on the front end of their 7th season now. So we knew that imminently they were going to get hammered by sevens programming, sevens training, sevens. So we thought, we're not going to hit them with heaps of big picture game stuff, and we're not going to hit them with lots of systems and play from set piece, because that's irrelevant for them for the next couple of months. Yeah. So what the focus ended up being, and also we were at the International Budo University, so that's Budo is martial arts, and so we were in the land of dojos and mat rooms and whatnot. We always set up a mat room, and our team room is our mat room, and we ended up spending most of the camp on the mats, either doing workshops. Like, this is a good window to talk about sleep for us. We know that they're probably awake too much on their screens too much. And then just some breakdown stuff and some ball into contact stuff, and just things that, like, we'll close this chapter, this sort of 15s chapter, especially knowing that the World Cup's going to be postponed. We'll close this and we'll give them some tools for the upcoming 7th season. And that's it. We just wanted a chance to be together and have a bit of closure. Yeah. And then, in terms of cool things, what did we do? We brought the injured players into this camp. And on the last day, we staged it was a rescue. We got them to film a video and then say, we're lost and we don't know where we are. And you have to come and find us, but you need to bring supplies. And so we had a bit of a challenge. So they had to get up sort of to a scenic lookout that was a bit of a half-hour run through the streets, down the hills, up the hills. And then they had points for which gear they took with them. So jugs of water or tackle bags or boxes of energy proteins or whatever. So it was entertaining on the last day.
Epic. That's right up my alley. I love that stuff. I do the whole camp like that.
It just just to be able to pull out something to surprise them and to have a bit of fun. And like, I'd been gunning do that on that location since we went there for the first camp that we had. So I was like, oh, it's perfect. Let's do it this time. Let's get them. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And what about COVID? What have you been, doing in terms of trying to, you mentioned that the Women's World Cup is postponed. How have you been trying to make sure that the team is still tracking well for when it's announced that it's a go ahead?
It was a massive gift for us, to be honest.
Yeah.
We were really lucky we were in our last camp, and I should just explain, we have a ton of camps, but it's because the domestic competition is quite minimal, and probably coach development and that is not at the point that we need it to be. So we have to have lots of camps, and just in small numbers of days, maybe 5 days, 4 days, but just have consistency and keep forward momentum. So we were lucky enough to be in camp when we got that information. It was the last day we actually woke up. We were meant to play a game that day and said, right, we're going to do this a little bit differently. Here's the news. You would have heard that. We're going to have a chat about it, have a talk. You old girls that were at the last World Cup, you go away, have a talk about your feelings, do some crying if you need to. Babies over here, middle girls over here, everybody have a chat, and then we'll do some work on the field if you want in the afternoon, play some games or whatever. So we changed that, and it just that would have been probably harder to deal with if we hadn't just been through the last 13 months of changing this. And everyone's adept at footwork now and agility around that corner, and okay, now what the hell are we going to do? So I don't see it as an issue anymore, because job is just constantly right, didn't work, what are we going to do now? Right, we're not going there, what are we going to do now? So and probably now that I say that out loud, lucky to have had the opportunity so many times to change a position, to change a plan, to move on the fly. Whereas if US have had a couple big residential camps, it's a lot harder when you're trying to get athletes from all across the country to a big block camp. It's harder to change your plans. Whereas for us, we've just sort of been light and nimble and
and that Japanese stoicism probably helps.
Yeah, that does help. It does help. But they're a young team, and that's what I was going to say earlier. We've been gifted. They're a young team. We're not where we could be physically yet. We're better than we were, but we're not where we could be. So, another year. And luckily, we probably still enjoy each other's company at this stage. So
it's good. It's always a bonus.
It is.
You mentioned a little bit there about coach development. What's that look like in Japan, especially in terms of female coaches, and what's your role in that?
I don't actually. It's a really good question. So formal coach development is sort of closed to me because I don't speak the language.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very formal coach development. I know there's a lot of paperwork that gets filled out, and there's a lot of probably seminars that get attended to, because I've seen people sort of going in and out of the little room at the JRFU and they're being educated. But as you and I could probably go on at length about, coach development is about getting the opportunities to coach, having somebody there to question, getting some feedback, doing some reflection, and then sort of challenge. Yeah. And in that sense, I think it's got a long way to go here. It's got a long way to go. And that's no different from a lot of other countries.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do, because I've been a coach educator, in New Zealand, that was part of my role. And then it's always been something I've been interested in. And what I'm trying to do at the moment with some women around me, and then with a chunk of my players, is just begin that process informally. So we're not doing certification, because at a certain stage, screw certification, it doesn't mean anything.
No, great.
But what process can be is, are you questioning each other? Are you developing an ability to be questioned and to look at what you've been doing, reflect and improve and enjoy that process? And we've got driver groups that are looking at different areas of the game. And we've got sort of analysts that are working with those girls in terms of how do you see it? How would you talk about that? Can you summarize your key points for the group? And then around me, I've got a couple of women that are coming along as coaches as well. So I think it's not a real formal process, but I do see it as my obligation to give on that level of things to the Japan women's program and the domestic program. We also try to invite, like if it's not COVID, we try to say any domestic club coaches, you're more than welcome to come to any of our sessions. Like come, be in the camp. We'll help you arrange for accommodation and stuff, and then just ask anything you want.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that'll pay dividends down the track. And the more female coaches in the game, the better. I'm an assistant coach to a female coach, and it's been a great learning experience for me. So I think the game's for everyone, and especially for a country like Japan with the women's 15s team, they'll need that to grow that game.
I think so. I probably think in Japan it's more relevant to actively develop female coaches. I think just in terms of the culture here and the way it traditionally fits with who's doing the telling and who's doing the listening, you do need to intentionally build those groups. But I think just in general, coach development, like I'm not saying elsewhere that women necessarily need too much of a handhold. Like I think people are pretty well equipped to get on with it themselves, and then just to keep chasing opportunities. But in Japan, it's a little bit different.
Yeah. No, cool. All right. Well, last question before we wrap things up. You were recently a panelist on the Coast to Coast Coaching Conference. It was a virtual conference put on by all the provinces here in Canada. What were some of your big takeaways from that experience? Because I've been on conferences before as a speaker, and I always get a lot out of it. And then I really get excited about then going and applying it. What were your big takeaways, and what were some things that you applied in particular?
I actually didn't think that I should mention the answer to this question to you earlier, but to be honest, like I really enjoyed being a panelist, but all of the stuff was on overnight.
Yeah, of course, the time change. Yeah,
I actually didn't catch any of it, so such a terrible answer to the last question.
It's a great, honest answer. I love it.
I caught actually, you know what I did enjoy though? The morning that I got up to do my bit, I think it was the French language session with Josh and Jamie.
Josh and Francois,
That was super cool. Yeah, like I'd never had an opportunity to just listen to that kind of conversation, or just a rare opportunity. So I enjoyed that. I caught a bit of the 15s sort of leadership group having a laugh after that. So those were good. But in terms of the conference, I really enjoyed the opportunity to come and speak. But cool looking program, zero attendance from myself.
Yeah. Well, the teacher doesn't have to attend all the other lessons. We'll go off that one. But you were presenting on in-game coaching, I believe. Yeah. What were some of your key messages there?
I think the key one that I probably said was just like know when to shut up. So when are you talking for you? When are you talking for your players?
Yeah.
And then be tactical about that. So I think that actually, it was funny thinking about that and reflecting and listening to people like Rob Halley and Tiff Faye that were on the panel. And the question, I think, you know what I thought they did really well in that session was bring in the AFL, God, I feel like a dick, I don't remember his name, I think it was Jason, to speak about initially some of the research on what do players hear from coaches.
Yeah.
And what kind of messaging is actually effective, and then thinking about that.
And how the scoreboard drives that too.
100%. And then what about that is for you or because of you, or pivots on you and your emotional response to something, and what percentage of that actually positively affects your players. And then, just having a good hard look at your percentages is probably important.
Yeah, and I think also in that is, how meaningful and planned are you for your halftime interactions as well with your team? Do you touch base with your assistant coaches 5 minutes before and map that out? Do you have a structure that you go through? Do you make sure that the players are actually participating in that conversation, or is it just like press play and go?
Yeah, to be honest, I've never really rated my own halftime contribution. So it was a discussion I really wanted to be a part of because I wanted to learn that.
Yeah.
So that's cool. To be honest as well, nothing is humbling in terms of what's my addition to this discussion. Nothing's more humbling than not being able to speak the language. And then realizing when you say stuff, sometimes it's into thin air. No one hears it. No one understands it. Therefore, no one can possibly care about it. But like all I've done is say it into the air to get it off my chest and then think, like, that was a completely egotistical remark. It didn't have any effect to anyone. No one translated it. Yeah. And so it's a really great tool for reflection, is just not being understood. And then if you really want that to be heard, you got to go find somebody and, can you translate this, please?
One of the many challenges, no doubt. All right. Well, yeah, sweet. All right. Well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up in Fort Nelson, BC, and other places in BC, who was one of your favourite rugby players or athletes that you really looked up to and admired what they did?
Yeah, there was no rugby playing about it, but I had Trevor Linden, Vancouver Canucks, number 16 and captain. I reckon he just embodied everything that I thought was great about an athlete and a leader. Yeah. And then, people listening, Andy, will know who I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. Especially those in the Southern Hemisphere, they'll be on top of this.
Yeah.
Cool. And what about now? Who are some players going around in rugby that you enjoy how they approach the game?
I love watching Peter Steph du Toit. So fell in love with his game when the Box played the ABs in Wellington in 2018, and he was just out on his feet. So I think it was who was it? Willie LaRue. LaRue took a yellow card last 13 minutes, and then just the exhaustion to win that game with 14 people and just like intense work. I think that's everything that I like it was what I liked as a player. It's what I love as a coach. And he embodies that, just work and selfless attitude towards your teammates. Love that.
It's a big frame to move around the field too when you're one player down.
Yeah, you're not wrong, actually. That's something that we probably don't think about enough, is how hard it is for those boys to get off the ground at the rate they do. So, yeah, actually complete polar opposite of my players here. And then from just thinking, because I've been watching the Women's Six Nations in the past couple of weeks, is the 2 French props at the moment. I think people need to pay attention to them. They're beautiful, beautiful players, really skilled in their jobs, and then just really good athletes. So loved watching those 2. So I think it's Desai and what's her name? Rose. The new Bernadette. That's the new one. Okay. So yeah, she's young. I love watching those 2, and I think that needs to be a model for what women's type 5 players look like going forward in terms of what they can do. I love that.
And if any country can show us how it's done, it's the French with their attacking style of play.
Absolutely. And to have 2 front row players consistently contributing to that is where the women's game needs to be.
100%. All right. And third question, what about coaches? Who's a high profile coach that you like what they're doing?
I would love to go and observe Brad Thorne at the Reds at the moment.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think probably a lot of the shift has been happening over the last couple of years. So it's maybe more interesting in sort of year 1, year 2, year 3, but like just looking at where he's got that program now, what those boys far out, that'd be a well spent week, I think, if you could go and see some of that. That said, we always like to go and look at what we already like doing and you know what I mean? So maybe I should say, somebody totally different. But no, just huge respect for that. And it's probably easier doing some of that messaging when you are Brad Thorne.
Yeah. So. Yeah, you got some runs on the board for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, but it's a good point. Year 3, and you look at where the starting point was, and they had some struggles in those first 2 years. And when it comes to building a team and a culture and values around how you want to be as a group, it takes time. It's just not an overnight thing, and you can see that happening with the Reds big time. Although they do have, who have they got? This will come out after the semi-final, but they just got done by the Western Force in Perth. So good time to lose a match just before the semi. So they'll bounce back massively, I feel.
Perfect time to lose a match, especially with dead rubber. But I think what you're saying about a young program taking the time to emerge, you've got to be able to demonstrate character. And I think that goes for a program as well. So even having those situations with a couple of players left to go and go overseas and chase those contracts.
Yeah.
There's a couple of second rows, don't need to name, but they got enough flack for that.
Yeah.
But to be real principled about this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to run our team through COVID, you're either on the ship or
you're not.
Yeah. I think those real public demonstrations are just reflections of how those smaller conversations would probably go in that program. That's where you get respect.
And I think going back to earlier on in the interview, it speaks to your values as a coach and how have you formed your values. And those values are, it's not wishy-washy. This is I value this is really important to me. And if you're going to go against my values, then we're going to have a conversation or we're going to part ways. And I think Brad Thornton emulates that.
100%. And that's where the trust is going to be placed in you, because you're showing that consistency and that character and the competency to sort of navigate through those discussions and hold true to what you're saying. And so he's going to have bought so much trust from his players, fan base, corporate sponsors, management. They're all going to see that kind of consistency. Yeah. And that's going to reap rewards.
Yeah. Totally agree. All right, and final question before we wrap it up. What about someone in the grassroots who's a coach who doesn't have the profile of Brad Thorne that deserves some recognition?
That was a great question. I was sitting here being like, which grassroots? Which country should I be talking about?
Any.
I had a really cool talk with Jess Nielsen, who's just started head coach at York.
Okay, cool.
Somebody who was a young player. She was a high school player when I was coaching at UBC. And she's, I think, gone through senior rep programs and whatnot. And she's now a head coach at a really young age. And so she and I just had a cool conversation on Zoom this week or last week. And she had a lot of really interesting reflections. And she had a lot of really great questions. And so I think she's going to do good stuff. So just keep an eye out for her.
All right. Well, they're all good signs.
Yeah, and I think that was exciting to listen to her talk. So, yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right, Lesley. Well, it's been awesome having you on the show and great to chat about Japanese rugby and your coaching journey. So, I want to thank you for giving up some of your time and good luck for the Rugby World Cup preparations whenever that will be. So thanks again.
Thanks, Andy, for having me.
No worries. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at Rugby Coaches CNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.